This is the normal, everyday process that goes through Jeff's head as he tries to decide what he will make his vlog about. He is often in a mental standoff with himself, one side being positive, the other a douchebag. Eventually, he has to come up with something so the good side wins. Jeff recently realized that his writing corner and time lapses are needing to be done in the morning so that he's not rushing to edit everything together late at night. He sets up his C100, powers it into an outlet, makes sure an SD card actually has space, hits record while starting his timer, then he writes. Once writing is done and his soul is fulfilled, he picks a corner to film in and sets up. Then he hopes to spend less than 20 minutes talking and tries very hard not to ramble. When he thinks that's all good, he turns off the camera and sighs a sigh of relief. All that's left is editing, and more editing. Once Jeff is done editing, he falls asleep.
Do you remember the last time you watched a movie and you saw a character do something that made you just go, what? That doesn't make any sense at all? That is probably because there was a plot hole or because you just weren't paying attention. But let's just imagine that there's plot holes. What are they? It's very simple what a plot hole is. It's simply a hole in the plot. But in my opinion, there's a lot of plot holes in tons of films nowadays, and it's really inexcusable. First, it's the writer's job to make sure that there aren't any holes in their plot. You have to make sure that what your characters are doing makes sense. Even if your film's a very mind-trippy, sci-fi, nothing's supposed to make sense, in the end, everything should kind of make sense depending on how you made the film. If you take films like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind or Memento, movies that are messing with the timeline, messing with your mind a bit, in the end, they're always making sense though. Eternal Sunshine has always been my favorite film, specifically because I feel like it's very flawless. It's such a genius film, geniusly written, directed, acted, everything. And when you really look at it, everything makes sense. What I was just working on was making sure that there weren't any plot holes. Usually in your first draft, you're not paying too much attention to your plot holes and seeing if things don't make sense. You're kind of just making sure that the whole story is working. But if you're like me, sometimes you'll pay attention to those things, especially in crucial moments like in the moment that I'm currently working on. You really need to make sure that those scenes are fitting the overall structure so that the movie will end up making sense. An easy way to constantly remind yourself about plot and to make sure that your story is making sense is to remind yourself that your audience is listening to you and trusting you, or at least they're wanting to trust you. Anyone that watches a movie is starting it by saying, okay, tell me something. I want to believe you. If you do a good job, they'll listen to you no matter what you say. You can set any types of rules, you can make any type of a world as long as you're making sense and as long as you're keeping the audience's trust. The second you tell your audience one thing about your characters and then the next second your characters are doing something completely different that doesn't have anything to do with what you've already established, you're now breaking that trust. You can make characters change, you can make characters do really anything as long as you set the rules in place that say, hey, this can happen in this world. Trust me. Hopefully that makes sense. The last thing I want to say about plot holes is that it's not always the writer's fault. Other people have their hands in the project once the writer is done with the script, so things could change and it could be a number of people's fault. But in the end, everyone should be trying their absolute best to make sure that their story makes sense, that all the bases are covered, that everything that the characters are doing makes perfect sense, and that you just have a very neatly, tightly wrapped film. Story matters a lot, but what's even more important than story is building trust with your audience so that they believe your story.